Love Boise State Public Radio podcasts? They are free to enjoy, but not free to produce. If you can give, your support helps keep shows like Idaho Matters and Scandalize available to everyone. Donate now at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. What can hope and resilience teach us about good mental health? And how can we incorporate this into our daily lives as we live in a world that often seems to feel unpredictable, even challenging? Well, next week, Boise State Public Radio will be holding a panel discussion where we will take a deep dive into this topic. But before that, we wanted to take some time today to chat with a couple of our panelists. Dr. April Masaryk is an associate professor in the Department of Psychological Science at Boise State University. And Kimberly Henderson is also a professor at Boise State, teaching psychology courses that include, but are not limited to, human relationships, as well as art and the science of happiness. And they're joining us today to talk more. Really nice to have both of you on the program.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thanks for having us.
So before we really dive into this, I want to know a little bit about each of you. So April, let me start with you. Give us a little bit about yourself and your focus of study and teaching.
So I essentially I'm interested in human development, how we grow and change over time. I'm interested in how we create and maintain our close relationships, including inside of the family and outside of the family. And a lot of my focus has been on the human capacity, the potential of humans to overcome challenges as we grow and age and connect with others across our life course. So it's really
April,
all
what
about
was it-
resilience and adapting to these challenges.
And April, I'm curious, what drew you to this line of work? Is there anything in particular that really, piqued your curiosity to really want to make a career of this?
My interest began long ago as a child, just very curious about humans and the way we change and grow over time and who we are and why we're here and how to make sense of our life. But in college, I became more and more interested as a psychology major here, actually at Boise State. And I was fortunate enough to make a career out of it and go to graduate school and study the topic from a scientific perspective.
So Kimberly, tell us a little bit about yourself and your focus of study and teaching as well.
So my position in our department is as a senior lecturer. So my 80% of my workload is teaching. I don't have any research expectations. So what I've gotten to spend my effort and resources on is developing various curriculums for what I hope to be really engaging courses and really meaningful topics. My hidden agenda in the majority of the work that I do is really trying to create context and experiences for students to use the science to leverage their own life, to improve their own quality of life, to enrich their relationships, and even more importantly, help them through this period of emerging adulthood and becoming as we disidentify from our families of origin, becoming more, for lack of a better term, themselves, and give them opportunities to seek and be curious and explore alternative ways of knowing and different ways of being.
And Kimberly, was there something in your life that made you want to, again, as I asked April, focus on this type of work?
I think I just came almost to this work by default. I loved the teaching environment, and I really began to see, especially at the college level, and an individual's ability to participate in their own thinking about their own thinking, the metacognition. I really started to use these environments as catalysts, right? Catalysts for experiences to really enrich and change and provide them with alternative experiences and an experience with the science that they could apply to their own life. So it wasn't a singular event or even a natural progression. I would say initially when I started developmental psychology, I was really interested in adult relationships and the impact of your parents parenting on you now as an adult. But my resources and curiosity absolutely shifted to the power of the academic and educational context.
So, folks, I will actually be moderating this panel next Tuesday, January 21st. And so, because of that, I got a chance to talk with both Kimberly and April a little bit offline the other day. And Kimberly, one thing that really struck me when we were talking was this idea of universal emotions. Can you tell us what that is, and the fact that happiness is one of those universal emotions?
Absolutely. What we mean by universal emotions is we identify that there are five. And what we mean by that is that there are universal expressions of emotions, which means that we can go anywhere around this planet, even in the most remotest, non-Westernized cultures, and still see the same facial expressions for things like disgust, fear, surprise, and happiness. And there's a few others in there as well. But which means that they're expressed the same way, right? The eyes change in the same way, the mouth moves in the same way. What we don't have universally is a universal cause for those emotions. So
Mm.
not everybody finds the same thing joyful. Not everybody finds the same thing scary. Not everybody finds the same thing disgusting. And so we have a lot of cultural differences in what are the impetus for some of those expressions. And then, of course, we have individual differences as well.
So let's dive into this idea of happiness a little bit more if we can, because it is something that seems as if we talk quite a bit about within our culture, right? And Western culture about trying to cultivate happiness. How do we find happiness? And I have to say personally, I tend to shy away from that because happiness is an emotion, right? And it's just like any other emotion. There is no way that I can be happy all of the time. So, Kimberly, how do we kind of maybe shift our thinking in some ways when we talk about happiness? I mean, should we be thinking more about something, let's say, like contentment, which is what I tend to think about is no matter how upset I get, no matter how angry I am, how frustrated I am, right? I can at least take a step back and still ask myself, but am I content even in these moments of distress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful insight and a great point to make. Happiness is used pretty ubiquitously throughout our culture to explain feeling good and having a positive experience. Sort of the grandfather or the impetus, the first publisher of the thoughts around positive psychology was a researcher named Martin Seligman, who's still very active today. And he started to publish in positive psychology and specifically wrote content on happiness and eventually moved away from happiness with the same perspective that you have, Gemma, is that it's really a transient emotion. It's something that's very moment dependent. It's influenced by mood. And it's very context related. And so moving away from this transient emotion and moving more towards the experience of what he would call flourishing, right, is this enriched life through five key factors. But even more importantly, this idea of contentment that we can have peace and ease and, for lack of a better term, sort of stay on the beam while we're weathering different contexts throughout our life or different struggles that we're experiencing. So we can even think about happiness as, or in this context, the low end of happiness could be contentment theoretically, and the
Mm-hmm.
higher end could be what we experience as a really positive affect of joy, which fits really beautifully with the science of flourishing.
I think that's so interesting too. And April, feel free to jump in here too. But because I think like I don't tend to be a really happy person. I mean, in the sense that I'm not always walking around with a smile on my face and like happy go lucky and everything's just great. I think I tend to be a bit more serious in a lot of ways. But when you said, Kimberly, like, but where do we, get to flourishing and joy? I feel that in my life. And so I wonder when, especially if you're someone who doesn't feel that kind of happiness all of the time, can this idea of when we put a lot of emphasis on something like happiness almost be overwhelming? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if everyone's reaching for something and we tend to, in our consumer culture, want more and more and more of things,
Mhm.
This idea that we can get more, we have lots of choices, let's pick the right one so that we can be happy, so that we don't feel anxious. Well, that all makes sense given our culture. Humans really want to feel comfortable in their bodies and their minds, and so it makes a lot of sense that we would want to feel comfortable, but reaching for something that is fleeting, that is kind of more temporary, that doesn't last a long time. It's an emotion. Perhaps maybe we're focusing too much on that and we're unhappy about not being happy.
So, April, I want to focus a little bit more now on resiliency. You've done quite a bit of work around this. And you said in a conversation that you and I had that resiliency has kind of become a bit of a catchphrase. So how do you think we should be talking about this idea of resiliency? And I guess, what is resiliency?
Hmm. Yeah, just kind of like the word happiness or any of these other buzzwords that are thrown around in our culture, resilience and resiliency. Um, tends to be thrown around in certain circles and people want to foster resiliency. It seems as though, we want to be more resilient. Well, what does it even mean? I personally like the definition that Ann Maston gives us. Ann Maston is a prolific scholar in resilience science. And she says that resilience is the capacity of a dynamic system to withstand or recover from significant threats to its stability, viability, or development. And that is a mouthful, but what I really like
Mhm.
about this definition is the words dynamic system. It's the capacity of a dynamic system, meaning it could be an individual person, it could be a group of people, in a school setting, for example, or in a family, in a community at large. It's a dynamic system that is trying to withstand and adjust or adapt to some kind of threat to its livelihood or development. But in more simple terms, resilience is essentially doing better than you ought to be doing given the circumstances.
So, can we talk about a real life example of this? We have all watched over the last week, literally parts of Los Angeles burned to the ground, thousands upon thousands of home loss, people uh, displaced. And what I have found interesting in this is that there seems, in some circles, to almost be a lack of sympathy for a lot of these folks who have lost their homes because they are celebrities, because there's this idea that they have all of this money, right? So, hey, you can build back, you're going to be fine. That may be true in regards to you'll have the ability to physically build back. But, April, how in the world do you literally and figuratively build back after something so devastating?
Well, it takes some time, and time is really a key variable in human development, especially when we're talking about some kind of traumatizing event or significant stressor like the destruction of a home. And whether we're really wealthy or not so wealthy, our home means a lot to us as humans, and seeing our homes be engulfed by flames can be very traumatizing for probably most humans. Um,
Hmm.
and, the trauma itself is an event that needs to be worked through and processed. While working through kind of the onset of the disaster, it's really helpful for an individual to have some tangible support or emotional support even from others around them in their community. It also helps to kind of get your mind right, acknowledge the trauma, acknowledge the fact that your home has been destroyed or that you've been through something really, really tough, acknowledging that, but keeping some kind of framework in your mind's eye around, okay, I'm going to get through this, having a sense of hope goes a long way, as we know from resilient science, having a sense of optimism, some kind of meaning making out of the traumatizing event. And ultimately too, communities need to rally, and groups of people who are working toward a common goal, like rebuilding, need to come together and connect. Those are just a couple of
Kimberly,
things that come to my mind.
yeah, I really appreciate that. Kimberly, before we wrap up, you both of you teach college courses. And one of the things you said is part of your teaching is how do we start to disassociate, right, from our family of origin and truly become our true selves. I'm curious about how we go about then teaching, our children as they're growing up, but even in those teenage years, right, before they go to college, about these these issues, right? Happiness, contentment, resiliency. Giving them some tools before we send them out into the world.
I, honestly, adolescence is probably a little late. Right? There's
Ah,
the culture of the
uh-huh.
family, right, that gets to nurture it. It's the language of the parents. It's the culture of the family. I do see longitudinal data about when children are young and their emotional expressions are received and acknowledged and supported and not condemned or dismissed by their parents longitudinally, right, after time, those individuals tend to regulate their emotions much more effectively, oftentimes because they're more familiar with them, right? They're more familiar with
Mm,
the experience of fear. They're more familiar with the experience of disgust or even happiness itself. That familiarity and that acceptance that they get to have in the their home context when they are young really helps them. And my goodness, when it comes to adolescence, like one of the things that we really are I'm a parent. I have two adult children now, and I'm a developmental psychologist, and I needed help with adolescence, right? I mean, that was the truth of it. And I think one of the best things that I got from the science, from a clinical cognitive neuroscientist, was he was like, those adolescents are not using the frontal lobe, right? They're not using logic and
mm-hmm.
reason yet, and everything is going to the primal center, right? And some people theorize that in the primal center of our brain, we either have fear or joy. And that's why adolescents tend to experience emotions on such the extreme, is because we're in either one of those poles. And that one of our opportunities as parents and caregivers and educators is to help them come into their frontal lobe by asking them questions. So, as far as like navigating and the culture of the family, I think, is really important to that emotional experience and expression. And then through that, adolescent transition where things can be really muddled with hormones and friend relationships, encouraging that, continuing to encourage that expression, but also help them cognitize it, right? Give them that opportunity to think about their own thinking in those relationships. And longitudinally, those people fare very, very well with respect to emotion regulation.
Well, I have to tell you, every time one of my kids does something a little bit off, uh, they look right at me and they go, "Mom, my frontal lobe's not developed." So maybe I've talked about
Yes.
it a little too much in our house.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, Gemma,
Oh, well,
I'm a mom of a 3.5-year-old, and what I'm really thinking about a lot right now is just modeling the kinds of things I would
yeah.
like my child to be able to do now and in the future. So, emotional regulation is huge. We might feel very stressed out or very dysregulated inside of our bodies. But if
Hmm.
our children can see that we are actually doing the things that we are telling them to do and exercise and practice, I think that goes a long way. In fact, modeling and children observing what adults do actually tends to be much more powerful than the things that we say to them
Mhm.
to do. So being
Hmm.
a good model, I think is really, really important.
They see everything, everything.
Yes.
I I want to thank both of you so much. I really look forward to our conversation next Tuesday. We've been talking with Dr. April Masaryk. She's an associate professor in the Department of Psychological Science at Boise State University, and Kimberly Henderson, a professor at Boise State teaching psychology courses that include human relationships, art, and the science of happiness. They will be two of our featured panelists next Tuesday, January 21st from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Idaho State Museum in Boise. We will be discussing happiness and resilience. We'll, of course, put a link on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org, so you can sign up for this event. We would love to see you there. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudet.
If you like podcasts like this, explore more from the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. There you'll find a mix of daily news, Idaho voices, and in-depth series on a wide range of topics. I'm talking wild horses, political scandals, sustainable ranching, and militia groups in a post-January 6th world. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Boise State Public Radio to find what Idaho's NPR station has in store for you.